As a survivor of domestic violence, I became involved with the charity Refuge. A few years ago, I gave a speech at the opening of their new offices, telling the story of the abuse I'd suffered at the hands of my first husband. Afterwards, a gentleman called Nav came over to me. He said he wished his sister could have been there. He thought that if his sister Gurda had have heard how I'd gone on to have a happy and successful life, then she too may have thought there was another life to be had, something worth living for.
Any sort of tragedy like that happens in a family, it can drive a person one of two ways. You know, either you can go down a very dark hole and just disappear down it, or you can look to see what positive you can bring out. The moment when I saw her neck and the noose having been round there, and that was it. You know, having understood that he'd been arrested, I thought at that point he was going to go to jail for either murder or manslaughter. There's no doubt in my mind that he was 100% accountable for his actions and his deeds to that point.
Since his sister's death, Nav has been working alongside Refuge to create a new law in the UK, a law that recognises a liability for suicide.
Gurda represents the thousands of women who experience domestic violence every day.
They all experience the same things. It's the same violent behaviour. And people just don't understand that, you know, there are organisations like Refuge here, which I think had Gurda known, or had I known, I am 100%, we would not be having this conversation today.
She was just too frightened to seek help, and when she did, she didn't get it.
Yeah.
And it was so typical.
So to take me through the marriage and this man, wonderful man that she met, presumably at the time.
On the first few years, it seemed all normal. Everything seemed fine. You know, they sort of set up. They bought a house in Cranford, the very first house they bought. As it went on, though, you know, as time elapsed, what started to become more apparent was his abusiveness, and the way he spoke to her increased. He'd choose his moment to sort of have a go at her about something at the moment people left, or before people turned up, and it'd almost be starting to control the way that she had to behave in front of people. Even at that point, I must have been sort of about 10 or 11 years old. I knew that when she talked to me, I could tell the difference when he was in the room or he was even in the house, and when he wasn't, because, you know, when he wasn't, she was totally different. She was relaxed and could speak quite openly.
In the home, this awful abuse was going on, and yet she managed to hold down pretty important jobs.
She was at Heathrow Airport as a security guard there, so as people leave or come into the terminal, she was responsible for making sure that the right baggage was checked and making sure that offensive items aren't carried onto the aircraft.
Just show me those pictures you've got there, because now you've got a particularly lovely one of
so that's
Gurda.
when Gurda got married in 1979, so she was 19 at the time.
She looks so peaceful,
Yes.
you know, and
Her married life was about to start, and like any woman or any man, you know, it's the day when all your dreams, have all your dreams to look forward to and all your hopes, and that's really when your life should begin, right? It's not your nightmare, which is what happened in her case.
I mean, you just can't believe the difference in that she looks so lost. Behind the legalities, the discussions and the campaigns lie thousands of real women, dead or devastated as a result of the abuse they've suffered. I met with a lady who didn't want to be identified, but wanted to explain why so many women would resort to taking their own lives. When you got married, was he the man of your dreams?
I didn't have an idea of man of my dreams. I was happy to be on my own. I was pursued and flattered and gave in. Somewhat immature. And as for the change, it came one day, very suddenly, out of the blue. There was a discussion, a minor argument, and it turned violent. It was completely unexpected.
The abuse kicked off because he'd come home and he said that the dinner that she'd made was too cold when it had been served to him. And she said, I can reheat it, give me a few minutes. Now, within that few minutes, he got agitated and he felt it wasn't good enough, so he decided to start verbally abusing her. She tried to stand up for herself, and that's when he decided to lash out.
After that, did you immediately think, that's it, I'm off? Or did you give what we've heard thousands of times before, a lot of excuses about why you should stay.
I honestly don't remember what my thoughts were. Honestly don't remember.
I mean, you obviously
I
did
think
stay.
I went into shock for quite a long time. Silent shock. Unable to think.
So he grabbed her by the throat, pinned her down, and started to punch her around the face. She tried to use her hands to protect her. That didn't stop. And then what he did was he smashed her head against the banisters as well, whilst the kids were watching.
Oh, no.
So that was how horrific. And
what age would the kids have been at that time?
So Vicky
about?
would have been, he was, I think, probably about 10 or 11 years old, and Paul was probably about 7 or 8.
Gosh, and they witnessed that?
They were witnessed, yeah. She fled the house. Once she came, gained consciousness and was able to drive, she just left the house and obviously drove around to her place of sanctuary, my father's house.
There were threats. There were threats about hurting people that I knew, people that I loved. Throughout all of this, it felt to me like a hostage kidnap situation. Not at any point did I think that I loved or cared about this person after that happened. I was afraid, very, very afraid, all of the time.
And you feel yourself in a very pathetic situation because there's nothing you can do.
And obviously, as we know, she went back to him.
Yes, well, this is the thing.
You couldn't stop that.
No, I mean, no matter how hard I tried, it was he knew which buttons to push. And again, and I come back to the point I made earlier, he made the point around the emotional blackmail. Think about what people will say. Think about your boys, how are they going to survive without a father?
The obvious question, why didn't you leave?
I was afraid. I tried a few times. I was found and I was hurt. So I stopped trying.
Can you explain any of those instances in any more detail for me?
No.
Okay, that's all right. What was his excuses as to why you were on the receiving end of this violence?
Yes, in answer to that, yes, it was always my fault. Either I hadn't done something or I had done something. Either I wasn't talking enough or being happy enough, or, every excuse under the sun for justifying doing that, for hurting me.
And that is one of those classic brainwashing techniques that the abuser always pulls out of the bag.
It's all a part of what they call they term as battered wife syndrome. The abuser continues and continues to mentally torture the person until they believe that they are always going to be in the wrong, no matter what. If the sun's up and he says the moon's up, she'll say it's the moon is up. To that degree of control, and that's what he did to her. But the interesting aspect is, on the flip side, when she was with him, she was her normal self, as far as normal could be.
Putting on the show, isn't it?
Yeah. So she was wearing 2 masks.
As you obviously held down a job, would it be fair to say that you had 2 different faces that you put on, one to friends and family and colleagues, and there was another person who was a different person who had to endure all this at home?
As best I could, yes, I did. There were 2 faces. There had to be. The humiliation at home was something that I didn't want anybody else to see. So, in public, I was a resilient, strong, reasonably happy person.
If you can think back, how would you sum up your world at that time? What your world was like?
Just fear-filled all the time. Just completely terrified. And the violence and the abuse was on a daily basis. There wasn't a day that went by that I wasn't physically or emotionally abused. I stopped eating. I didn't go anywhere apart from to work and back. I was functioning like a robot. I was doing what I needed to do to exist. But I just remember staring at walls for hours and hours sometimes. I didn't do any of the stuff that people would call living.
A new law to recognise a liability for suicide has gained backing from one of the charity's most famous supporters, comedian Jo Brand. In a former life, you were a psychiatric nurse.
That's right. I mean, I was a nurse for 10 years, and for 6 of those years I worked in a 24-hour psychiatric emergency clinic, walk-in, anyone that wanted to, in South East London. So I'm sure you can imagine it was quite busy and quite fraught.
And presumably, I mean, you would know from that work the psychological abuse that people suffer in domestic violence. You would know the effect that can have on a person. Because people often say to me the mental abuse was worse than the physical abuse.
Oh, absolutely, and very powerful. And I think that the issue with that sort of ongoing abuse is that it grinds you down. And so as time goes on, you are less able to deal with the effects of it, and you internalise it until you end up feeling as if you're a completely worthless person. And I think that's why in that state you would then consider something like suicide, because you wouldn't think that you are a person who's worth looking after or saving, and also going along with that, you wouldn't want to be alive anymore, because it just grounds you down to the point where you feel that you're nothing.
But I think we need to be clear that these women are not mentally ill, and you don't have to be mentally ill in order to reach this point. It's a normal point of utter despair.
In 90% of domestic violence cases, where women are being abused, the forgotten victims are in the same room or the next room. In 50% of these cases, they are directly abused as well. The forgotten victims are the 750,000 children a year witnessing domestic violence.
We did a piece of research last year, and we were looking at what services were available for children primarily across London. It was quite shocking to find that there were skeleton services in most areas, and in some really nothing at all. It's mind-boggling to think that there's really very, very little of a specialist nature to respond to these children. You know, we talked about how it's a secret, how women blame themselves, little kids are living in fear. They need a specialist response to help them understand what's happening, and to help them develop the skills to stay safe, and to make different choices for themselves in their own lives. And it's just not there.
A child that's witnessing this, they've got nowhere to go. The following morning, they're going to school, and they, like their mothers then, are almost putting on this facade that actually life's okay at home. Nobody wants to be saying, guess what, my life at home, my mum gets beaten up by my dad, and I hate being at home.
They go to school, but they have to return home at night. A home which is torn apart by violence.
One of the young girls who we talked to told us that she said she was going crazy, she couldn't sleep, she was angry and so on. And they tried to arrange counselling for her. And she said, but I couldn't get any because I was 10 and they don't have it for my age.
Do we really want children to grow up in a world where they are watching their mothers being beaten black and blue? We had one 8-year-old watch his mother being shot in the stomach. Is that the kind of world we want our children to be growing up in? How many children are witnessing and experiencing domestic violence? This is serious. It is affecting the social fabric of our society.
Nazir Afzal is now the Chief Crown Prosecutor for the North West of England, and it was Nazir who reviewed NAV's and Refuge's original case and other legal routes available.
It's very rare for me to be able to remember a case from 7 years ago or more, but I remember 22nd of February 2005, your sister hung herself.
no cases have ever been tried bringing a liability for suicide against a perpetrator of domestic violence. This, I think, was the first time. And the route that the Crown prosecution decided to take was to prove that the psychiatric harm that had been caused to Gurda was would equate to bodily harm under the law. And if that could be proven, then you could make a charge of manslaughter against Mr. Dhaliwal.
My nephew rang me, he said, can you please come to Ealing Hospital? Something's happened to your sister Gurda. And I remember at that point, I just said, are you sure everything, what's going on? Was everything okay? He said, no, you just need to get to the hospital. And there was a moment when I just thought, actually, she's not alive anymore. And I did ask him, and he just said, look, you need to come to the hospital.
When it first came to court, the police had charged him with common assault, which is the lowest form of assault, basically for the injury that she had on her face.
Her arms were bruised, her forehead had a massive gash on the top of it. And that's when my sister was saying, he's killed her, and my nieces were just sat there, they were going, you have to do something, we have to do something, you have to do something, just something.
My advocate in court thought, well, actually, hang on, let's give the police some time to find out a little bit more about what had happened in this situation. And we did, and the police found the journal. Police found there was earlier complaints made to police. Obviously, there were people within Nav's family that were able to give evidence about the history of the abuse that she'd encountered. And the more that came out, it firstly enabled us to pursue an assault occasioning actual bodily harm, which is more serious than a common assault charge, and then enabled us to take it to the Crown Court, which is basically gave us time to build a stronger case. And the way we were approaching it was simple, that he caused her death.
So he came home and he'd started beating her, and he'd beaten her very, very badly. And at that point, she had said, I'm going to kill myself. I can't do this anymore.
There was some case law already at that time that said that if the victim who has taken her own life or his own life had suffered a psychiatric injury caused by abuse or whatever treatment they had received beforehand, then you could show that this person was responsible for it. Even if they weren't there at the time when they did it, even if whatever act they had taken with that particular person didn't immediately cause the death, the build-up enabled us to proceed.
She put on her slippers, opened the kitchen back door, walked out to a granny annex they'd built, out in the snow where her footsteps still were apparently, and opened the door. She'd taken the punch bag off the punch bag hook, put a rope around it, put the other end, the noose around her neck, and ended her life.
Because this was new territory, usually I would get one expert and rely upon that expert's advice, but I knew that this was going to be challenged in the court. So I had to get more than one expert, and I managed to find 3 experts around the world, actually, 1 from Canada and 2 from the United Kingdom, who looked at the evidence. And that was in part the problem, because this being new territory, you had one expert saying, yes, she was suffering from post-traumatic stress disorder, which is what you encounter after being in a war zone. And that is a psychiatric illness. So we were, we're up. Unfortunately, the other 2 experts said that while she had symptoms of a psychiatric illness or psychiatric injury, she didn't get to that level, that threshold, and they were saying that she's actually encountered some psychological impact. Now, psychological impact is emotional distress, fear, anxiety, those kinds of things. Now, as far as the law in this country is concerned, it does draw the line.
Now then, when the police arrived, they asked to see my sister. My youngest nephew had turned up. He'd come home, and they were questioning Harry, where is she? He couldn't figure out where he was. He was already drunk anyway in bed. And that's when my nephew said, hang on, I think there's someone out in the granny annex. So he led the police out. So 17 and 18-year-old boy leading them out. You can start to picture it, opening a door in the dark, switching the light on, and seeing his mother hanging from a hook.
There were 3 experts in the case, and it fell down because 2 of the experts found psychological harm, and only 1 expert found psychiatric harm. And there's a distinction, albeit arbitrary, between these 2 states of mind. One, psychiatric harm is an illness and diagnosed by psychiatrists, and psychological harm is more about the ways in which events change people's thoughts and behaviour and feelings.
And my father actually did say to her, he said very clearly that, he said, "Is everything okay at home now?" He said, "Tell me if there's any problems, you will come straight here and you won't allow it." She said, "Dad, I promise you everything's fine at home." And I think that's the one thing that my father was really upset about. And he said, "Well, you know, anything ever happens," she said, "Dad, I'll always come here first."
There will always be huge problems gathering evidence of psychological or psychiatric harm in the deceased, because they're not there for us to interview, to assess, let's say. And even when people are there, you know, even when you've got a person in front of you, you will find experts disagreeing about what particular mental state or illness a person is suffering from.
The judge said, "Look, good trying is here, but not on this occasion."
He walked away scot-free and he got everything in terms of all the payouts because his wife had actually ended her life. So he, from what I understand, he had the mortgage paid for him, he got the life insurance. So it was almost like he got a reward for 25 years of punishing someone. It will drive me and it will keep me going to make sure that we do change the laws, because this can't happen to anybody else. It's not fair, it's not right. There's no justice in what that happens. You know, it's just, the whole thing's all wrong, especially in this day and age when, you know, we live in a civilized society. How can we accept that there's no law for liability for suicide?
Now in India, they have a liability for suicide law. I don't think they call it quite that, but it's essentially what it means. And they've brought cases against perpetrators of domestic violence without any regard whatsoever to the mental state of the victim. They've just looked at whether there was a history of abusive behaviour towards the victim. And you know, they understand that it's likely that people, given that set of circumstances, may feel the only way out is suicide. And that's where we feel we need to be going in this country, to just, you know, if there is evidence of psychiatric or psychological harm, then that would be an aggravating feature in the case. But if there isn't, you can still proceed if you can establish a course of abusive conduct.
When Nav's case failed, the campaign received a huge amount of support from Ian Duncan Smith, who gave a 10-minute rule bill. In that rule bill, he stated the following:
May I say how pleased I am to see that the Leader of the Opposition, my right honourable friend, the Member for Witney, Mr Cameron, is in his place to listen to my argument. I know how strongly he feels about this subject. I urge the Government to think positively about including an offence of liability for suicide in any new legislation, and also carefully to consider expanding the definition of diminished responsibility so that it includes a proper recognition of psychological injury. Let me quote what the Court of Appeal Judge Roberts, QC, said in the summing up. It is very hard not to see some connection between the incident of violence which appears to have taken place shortly before her death. The following is the most apposite quote from the judge. I would have thought there was some force in the argument that the last straw played a significant part in causing her death. I would add, in fact, that it is common sense. Surely there is hardly anybody in this chamber or among the general public who has not long believed that there are often connections between suicide and things that have gone on before. It is absurd to have to rely on an act that was passed in 1861, before psychiatry was even born and the link between physical and mental trauma was fully appreciated. The key point that we should all admit and accept is that we must never make any excuse for the abuser. Abusers have no excuse. I will leave the House not with my words but with those of Mrs. Dhaliwal's brother, Nav Jagpal, who has campaigned strongly on this matter. After the failed attempt to prosecute, he said, "It is unbelievable that we are allowing this kind of thing to happen all over the country." He concluded movingly, "I could not save Gurjit, but I will not let her death be in vain."
But how do laws get changed? How does Nav trigger a series of events that will at least get his voice heard? We contacted the press office here at the House of Commons to see if somebody in government could talk us through the parliamentary process of law change with direct regard to this subject of liability for suicide. We emphasised the most recent figures. 30 women a day attempt suicide and 3 women a week actually commit suicide as a direct result of their partner's abuse. We think those are figures worth listening to, but sadly, and to my eternal amazement, all our requests for interviews were denied.
Well, it was picked up actually by the government, and in 2009, ACPO, the Association of Chief Police Officers, took up the issue, and we were then again involved in a review of liability for suicide, and it was at that point where it was ideas were crystallised really in terms of establishing this course of abuse over time, rather than looking for psychological or psychiatric injury as the primary finding or primary evidence on which to proceed with a case. And I believe that ACPO are going to look at it again this year, or at least that's what was agreed in 2009.
We contacted Chief Constable Carmel Napier to ascertain what progress has been made in changing the law since Gurda's death.
Well, my personal commitment today to Nav, as a result of the tremendous legacy that rightly he's fighting for Gurda, is that I'll make sure, through the Home Secretary's Violence Against Women group and the Welsh Government Domestic Abuse Bill, that these matters are considered in 2012, and that I can personally report the feedback from both those government meetings about how that's going to progress and take forward.
Upon the completion of this film, there has still not been an official review for a liability for suicide law.
1 woman in 4 is physically abused at some point during her lifetime. 2 women a week are killed by a current or former partner. Domestic violence costs the state £16 billion a year. We need to do something to prevent it. Prevention is better than cure. We need to get into the schools and teach children how to deal with feelings of stress and frustration and to avoid using conflict to handle those feelings. We need to educate our society, arrest and charge perpetrators. That sends out an important educative message, that your behavior will be prosecuted, you will be held accountable. It says to the woman, you don't have to put up with abuse. It says to the wider society, domestic violence is a crime, it's against the law, and there will be consequences for that behavior. We need to do much more in terms of providing services for women so they can escape. Refuge is struggling. We can barely survive as an organisation. Our future is very precarious, and it shouldn't be down to charity. Why is it? The most worst crimes in our society, we help the most disadvantaged and vulnerable women and children. This is down to charity. The government needs to be doing more. Local authorities need to be funding services. If they don't, the costs will escalate. The human misery will escalate. We are in danger of returning to Cathy Come Home days, where women are forced to sleep on the streets or return to a perpetrator. What kind of a world do we want to live in? This is Britain, as Nav says, 2012. And hopefully we will, with this film, we will be able to generate even greater awareness around the problem. We need to speak for the dead to protect the living.
Of course, a new law that recognises a liability for suicide will have an impact far beyond getting justice for the victims of domestic violence.
How do we carry on coping? You do, you learn to cope with what's happened, but you never forget. You can't ever forget your sibling, and especially for me, Gurda was, the ideal sister. I couldn't have ever imagined a better sister than her. I know that, where my life is today, she would have been a huge part of it. And, with her having been contributing so much earlier, I know that I'm the way I am today because of her.
This is Hanworth Road Crematorium, where friends and family said goodbye to Gurda. She was a beloved mother, daughter and sister, abused by her husband until the concept of living was simply too much to bear. In the few short months it's taken us to make this film, approximately 10,500 women in the UK have tried to commit suicide for the very same reason. 150 of those women did take their own lives, and 150 violent and abusive partners have seemingly got away with murder.